Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much, Andy. As Andy has said, I'll kick off the morning by talking to two topics, really, in the main anyway, two topics. Becoming data-driven, or in the case of many of our customers, becoming more data-driven, even more data-driven. And also the Internet of Things. And I'll start with the second of those two things because it's a term that's being used increasingly, but the research at the moment says it's not particularly widely understood, certainly not deeply understood. And also because the implications for business intelligence and analytics are quite significant, that the Internet of Things will start producing, is already starting to produce sources of data that are new and helpful, can produce new insights and work together with other things to produce insights. A definition, just to get that topic underway. So the Internet of Things is the network of physical objects, things, that contain embedded technology to sense and to interact with their internal state or the external environment. So things with sensors in them. And really it's about an ecosystem that includes the things themselves with these sensors, the communication capabilities, and the data analysis that makes an extra, really a new wave of the internet happen. So if you think back to a long time ago now, the beginning of the internet was really about people looking at pages. And then for quite a long time, we've had people looking at pages, but also servers talking to servers across the internet. And this latest wave is really about many, many devices coming along, products with intelligence in them, adding into that network that's the internet. So that's a kind of definition of it. Some examples. So first of all, this one from Michelin. They make tyres. You probably know that. They for a long time have had a reputation for being very innovative in the way they approach tyres. They have been putting sensors in tyres and then also developing the software to pull information from those sensors, information that can be used by fleet managers to start managing costs better, to reduce fuel consumption, for example, and to manage costs downwards. So by using sensors and by putting software and gathering that information, they can offer something of benefit to fleet managers. But they can also themselves then choose to sell, if they want, tyres, not buy a tyre, but in terms of kilometre, here it says kilometre-driven basis. So they can actually shift the selling of tyres to the selling of a service, tyres as a service. Now, will that be very good for them? Who knows? What will a competitor do? What will Goodyear do? What will Bridgestone do? Do they have to move in the same way? Effectively, this is an example of a manufacturer still being a manufacturer, but also being a provider of a service as well. So there's a change there. And of course, the byproduct that's of interest is the information that's being generated here. A second example, General Electric, makers of many, many things, including aircraft engines. And in this this area, they've been putting sensors in aero engines for quite a long time. That information comes back and is the basis of their preventative maintenance program. And they've taken that a step further and actually created a business around fleet optimization, aircraft fleet optimization. So another example of sensors being put into products, manufacturers becoming not just manufacturers, but manufacturers and providers of value-added services. So people aren't putting sensors in products for the sake of it. They're putting sensors in products, and as a function of that, they're able to better understand how their products are being used. They're able, therefore, to better service the customers and consumers of those products. They're able, if they take it a step further, to create business opportunities out of that. So that's a couple of examples to give a flavour for the Internet of Things. A third example, no slide for it, but a third example, there's an organisation called Intra. Intra is the leading e-marketplace for container shipping in the world. It's backed by some of the biggest shipping companies, people like Maersk, Hapag-Lloyd. In fact, backed by a lot of them. And it has a very, very big share of the market. So something like 35% of container shipments in the world are handled through its marketplace. 35% of container shipments is 22% of world trade. So a colossal amount of world trade goes through Intra. Intra is essentially the equivalent of, say, Expedia. It is to container shipments what Expedia is to booking a trip on an aeroplane. But like FedEx, it gives you tracking information. So if you're a customer that books your container shipments through Intra, you can get information throughout the journey on where your shipments may be. So that's reassuring to the customer. But that data is also incredibly valuable, and Intra sells, in addition to that service of shipping, it sells data feeds. Anybody who wants insights into world trade flows might well find value in Intra's data feeds. So I use that third example because you might well be thinking, well, what would I do with tire information? Or even if I could think of what I'd do with tire information, how would I get my hands on it? Well, increasingly, where data is being originated digitally, people are beginning to think about not just the use of it in their immediate industry, but also the wider applications and the ability to broker that data or sell that data or package it up for other people's benefit. And in some ways, think about supermarket checkouts and barcode scanners. That's a very early example and now a very well-established example of data being generated and being brokered and used very widely. Think now, if you would, about the growth of smartphones, the adoption of smartphones, and the use with smartphones of apps, the staggering growth in apps. And I'd like to try out with you as an audience, so some participation required, warning, participation required. Some assertions that I've come across recently about the growth of apps. So first one, think about, if you would, from your own personal experience of using apps. So apps are becoming more important than search as a basis for advertising. So think about that. Hands up if you think that that's plausible. It stacks up with your own use of apps and experience. Show of hands, anybody agree with that? A few in the back, but I wasn't particularly convinced because I just think of search as being so huge. Next one. More important than websites as a basis for online purchases. So think about what you might put. So some hands there, yeah? Some people agreeing with that one. And certainly when I think about some things like trips on certain train routes, it's just so easy to purchase on an app that's where it gets done. Next one. Basis for gathering information from consumers. Quite a few people, those questions that always make me nervous, do I want XYZ app to know about my location? I answer randomly. I suppose it's not random, but probably is random when looked at, but each time it's an agonizing decision. Important in banking for electronic money and online banking. And you realize when you lose your phone, it's really, really important in banking, online banking. So there's a huge growth in apps, and that too relates to this whole thing, digital information being originated and available. Now on to some work. This is work done by Gartner in February about the level of understanding of the Internet of Things, and really telling us that there isn't very profound, there isn't much understanding of the Internet of Things in and amongst senior executives. I mean, it varies by sector, but you can see there, once you get outside the service and the utilities sectors, the majority of senior executives really have either no understanding or little understanding of the Internet of Things. So there's some learning, some education required here. There's big opportunity for industries. And we'll move on to opportunity. So another slide from that same Gartner research. So on the axis going across. It's asking respondents really about how big will the impact be of the Internet of Things in the short term, and on the vertical axis in the longer term. So out there in the front are the utilities. Well, the utilities industry, already big users of telemetry, smart metering, etc., etc. So not only is information being gathered, but business models are already changing in utilities. If you go to the other end of the spectrum, the cluster down here, government, education, people sort of either not with it or struggling to understand whether it will impact their domains. Banking, well, we've just seen that certainly digital online, app stuff is pretty important in banking. Insurance, Gartner themselves admit that their survey really didn't distinguish between different types of insurance. So you might well expect there to be a much more profound impact of the Internet of Things in, say, motor insurance, with the opportunities to get information back on driving, vehicle usage, driving habits, etc., than perhaps in life insurance. So the way that graph looks at the moment might be to a large extent to do with the understanding or the lack of understanding by sector of the opportunities among senior executives. And a slightly similar graph, same axes, but this time just cut by size of company. It's not the very largest companies necessarily that see the greatest opportunity at the moment. It's the significant medium-sized businesses that seem to really get it, or at least they see a lot of potential in it. Now, all of that, I guess, our overall message as a business intelligence and analytics services provider is that, it's about data. This phenomenon that is happening will provide many new and rich sources of information. We mustn't be afraid of them. So it's about taming the data in many ways. It's just, if we can get ourselves to the mindset where we think these things are out there and they're just, and each one of them, just another data source. So we might have to think very differently about the kind of architectures in which we capture things. Some of our traditional notions of the role of a data warehouse and what can go into a data warehouse, what can't go into a data warehouse, might need modification. And in the next session, my colleague Julia will pick up that theme. So I won't say any more about it than that at the moment. I will, though, introduce another Gartner piece of thinking. So Gartner has been talking in the last year or so about this notion of bimodal IT, and that in the future, IT organizations will really have to have two separate flavors within them, within the organization, two different parts. The part of the organization that is the steady, solid, traditional IT department looking after things that must be stable and hopefully run efficiently. But also the more experimental, agile part of the IT organization that needs to be very, very closely aligned to business and to keep on top of some of these opportunities in innovations. Now, I don't know whether that resonates. I mean, I could ask the audience again. Do those distinctions resonate with you? Are they resonating in your? There's somebody nodding and putting a hand up. But more generally, do they resonate in your organizations? So some awareness of it, some thought. In terms of our business, I guess business intelligence done well has really always been about, probably always will be about bridging those two things. The need to run operational systems very well, but to capture data from those operational systems, fuse it with things that might also be of interest to the business to gather insight. Some of you will recognise, in fact, that bottom part there, the bottom diagram, is the very basis of Thorogood's approach, really. When we're approaching any problem, we'll focus, first of all, on understanding the technical possibilities hand in hand with the business goals and seeing how opportunities drop out. Moving on to the data-driven decision-making. So those of you that have been to previous events like this will have seen me in particular reference this slide before. So data-driven decision-making is correlated with a lot of good things: better productivity, return on assets, return on equity, ultimately market value. And it's correlated, but it also seems to be causal. So says this study by Wharton and MIT. So there are obvious and strong benefits of being data-driven. It pays at the bottom line. Another study, MIT Sloan Management Review, that the impact of analytics in the companies that use it the best, the top performing companies are using analytics everywhere for strategic decisions, for day-to-day operational decisions, for big decisions, for small decisions. So it's just ingrained in the way they work. And I always think it's best never to forget that, in fact, without data, you're just another person with an opinion. That's always worth keeping in mind. We've talked in previous sessions like this, we strongly believe that it's very important to think about a continuum in BI and analytics, not to get hung up on definitions and not to try and segment things down to a meaningless level. In fact, it's much better to think of things flowing along a spectrum. At one end, broad user base. All of us, really, everybody in an organization who needs to get some level of information. And at the other end of the spectrum, niche experts, probably a much smaller population in most organizations, niche experts who will perhaps need something special, something much more specialist. So, for example, we think in terms of productionized BI at the end of the spectrum that serves that broad base, the need for very robust, very reliable systems that pull together data, align it, and serve it out in the form of reports and the ability to query data structures that are designed to serve the mass population. But as you move down the spectrum, it's pretty important. People more and more want to be able to do things ad hoc. They want to add in new data sets. They want to ask more ad hoc questions. So the support for the ad hoc is very, very important. Stimulating ideas, for example, by adding in a new data set in conjunction with existing understood data, visualizing things, reshaping the data to test hypotheses. So not just looking at the data the way you conventionally get it, but being able to turn things around a little bit and look at them from different perspectives. The aim, obviously, being to push insights into the organization. And at the extreme, at the smaller specialized population, the people who need statistical models and mathematical models and the ability to build those models, maybe to quantify the relationships that they are finding are there, or to simulate complex systems, or to predict what a customer is going to decide when confronted with a particular choice, or what's going to happen in the near future as we project out. So that continuum we've talked about in previous things, but what we're finding in our customer base now is quite a lot of work. I mean, people talk about self-service. Certainly the vendors talk about self-service technology, but increasingly we're finding customers profoundly interested in how they move people along that continuum. How do you get people in your organization who are managing business functions to become more and more comfortable and more aware of data and how you can use it to best advantage? So we have customers now working with us to run programs of effectively education and empowerment. And Amanda will pick up on that later today. A couple of words before I finish about two software vendors. So last time round we talked about Tableau. Tableau software has been making a lot of the running in the visualization space for a few years now. And last time we had one of these events, they were about to launch Tableau 9. They have now launched Tableau 9. They modestly tagged it fast meets smart. And it's faster, it's smarter, and I think you'll be shown some of it a bit later. So things are progressing in the industry. And last time out as well, I spoke a little bit about the management changes at Microsoft. So those management changes, certainly at the overall level, happened perhaps a year ago, and pretty quickly had an impact in the way Microsoft approaches BI and the people managing its BI division. And what we're seeing now, the latest things that we're seeing from Microsoft show those guys really have their act together. There's an awful lot happening, not just in the visualization space, but really from Microsoft across the whole continuum, really. So the Microsoft Power BI story is evolving a lot, and you'll see a little bit of that later. So with that, I think I'm done. So thank you for listening, and I'll hand over now to Julia and Pravathika, who will show you the next bit.